Sorry. Harris versus Trump in the energy sector. It's a pleasure having Professor Cleveland Jones with us in the Café com Cavanha podcast.
Nice to be with you again, Cavanha.
Yeah, let me show a little bit Professor Jones' profile. Consultant in the oil and gas industry, researcher, and he's handling consulting assignments on geopolitical implications, and very strong guy in the energy sector. Thank you for coming. Let me show, please, Professor, a slide, a very short slide, related to Harris and Trump main drivers, if I may say that. So Harris, Kamala Harris, I suppose she is trying to rejoin Paris Agreement, and the focus is 100% clean energy by 2035. She sees strong environmental regulations and promoting green technology and electrification. Trump, on the other side, sees deregulation, no Paris Agreement. He doesn't like this. Increase domestic fuel, fossil fuel production and natural gas exports, and construct infrastructure, strong infrastructure, enhancing energy independence. So he sees independence situation for the United States. How do you see these directions are clear for you? Do you see it?
Yeah, it's interesting, Cavanha, because I think some of these things that are touted as what I want or what I'll do have actually already come about. Just this month, the United States has finally become truly energy independent in the sense that it is producing of all sources of energy, more energy than it actually is consuming. Sure, there's some inflows and there's some exports and so on, but that is something that maybe makes the claim that we're going to become energy independent. Well, we're there, in the United States, but it is important because, as you showed, Trump is still obsessed with drill, baby, drill, and so on, and those are very clear policy decisions, directions that he wishes to take the country. And of course, Kamala Harris, I think, is on the other camp. And indeed, we will see major differences in how each handles at least the fossil fuel industry in the U.S. That's oil and gas. Just recently, again, Kamala Harris, who has been very much on the offensive against the oil and gas industry, reversed her stance. She came out and said, no, she's not against fracking anymore, which I'm very happy to hear. For example, as a geologist and involved in the business, we know that it's not fracking per se that is bad. Pollution is bad. If you have bad operating procedures in the industry, whether that be the oil and gas industry or mining or anything else, you're going to have accidents. If you have accidents, you have environmental consequences, you have all kinds of problems. So it's not a fracking problem. And I'm happy to see that maybe we're beginning to see some convergence. I think that the Democratic Party, for example, has some renewed enthusiasm with Kamala Harris, but it has also come to the realization that as a platform, the progressives have got it wrong in terms of fossil fuel. Oil age is going to be with us for a very long time. Oil trading, oil production, oil consumption, oil and gas. And so, it's ridiculous to say, we'll go against oil production or something. You could justify, and I think we could see some of that in the kinds of incentives that might be provided in the economy, some redirection into demand shift. That is different than a supply control, because that is absolutely not justifiable. That just creates economic problems all around for the economy. So maybe we're a little bit closer to seeing some kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, recognizing that the fossil fuel industry is important and it will be there. And this recent shift in Kamala Harris is maybe the first that we've seen in a long time among the Democratic Party.
Now, let me see. Hello, is there sound for this presentation? Well,
Oh,
someone is not hearing us. Why?
well, I hope we all
William Brown.
coming through.
Yeah, he's in LinkedIn. But I answered him that yes, we are live and with sound.
Okay.
Okay. Let's go ahead. I receive you very well. No problem. Professor Cleveland, when you mention energy independence, and we see that Democrats are not clearly following independence in terms of energy, what does it mean exactly? And Republicans are following.
Yeah, I think that was not their focus at all. Their focus was, of course, clean energy or energy transition or net zero. And as you said, very likely, if Kamala Harris gets elected, or at least that will be her platform, is joining and keeping the U.S. and the Paris Agreement and making efforts in that direction, maybe even continuing some of the subsidies to alternative energies and clean energies, which, as you and I have discussed in other occasions, personally, I'm against subsidies on that basis because the economic system and the pricing system are quite effective. We can take care of that if we consider externalities. So I think that is one of the realizations that I mentioned, that I think that the progressives are coming to realize, yes, electric cars, they can be there. Maybe we should, support them to the extent that we're doing.
But the point is the following: is it possible a country be independent in terms of energy? Never.
What that means is just energy balance. It's silly because no country is independent, even the United States and others that produce more energy than they consume. Saudi Arabia actually imports oil. And people say, what? Yes, they import very heavy oil because they need that to produce asphalt. They need roads also. And you can't make asphalt from
there is a compensation. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. So
you export some products that import others. So it's normal.
So I think that one of the changes, maybe the more significant contrast, is between Harris and Biden, because I think going forward we will see, more LNG projects will be unhindered. They should have never been hindered, but it's coming to the realization that we have to, policymakers have to make policy for the beneficiaries of the population of the U.S. in that case.
Yeah, there's a point that takes my attention, because the propaganda says that Republicans are not aware about environmental protection. Is it clear for you this difference is so different?
I think that there's, the sin is on both sides. The Democrats didn't really recognize the importance of the fossil fuel industry in the U.S. economy and in keeping global geopolitical strife under control. And the Republicans did not recognize until very lately, and I think now we're seeing more Republican candidates at lower levels recognize that clean energies are okay, even solar and wind are okay if they're recognize the cost of the infrastructure that they need in order to pump energy into the economy. If they're not connected, they're useless. If the grid doesn't, power grid is not sufficient for them to put energy into the grid, they're useless. So that's the realization that slowly, I think the Republicans are also coming around to that, even in states like Texas, which is already a leader in wind and solar nowadays too, not just California.
But see, for electrification, for instance, Democrats are following the electrification in the country, but it's not the same that to say that Republicans are not following electrification. Electrification on what? Everything
Yeah.
to be electrified is impossible.
Yeah, no, I think electrification is a much more complex subject, which honestly I don't think either of them understand very well. Now, the people who are very gung ho on net zero and energy transition say, oh yeah, we just need more solar and wind. Obviously, that doesn't work like that. You need a lot more. And of course, the Republicans are also have uh, uh, committed a sin in saying, no, we don't want any of those new energies. Of course you do. You want a selection of energies. That strengthens your resilience in terms of what happens if anyone is impacted. They often bring up the situation in Texas a long time ago, a few years ago, when the grid was not connected to the natural grid, and oil and gas were not sufficient to power the demand because wind and solar were out. And that is just pointing to the need for alternative energies to be introduced into the power grid in a reasonable way, in the correct way, which is recognizing their needs for strengthening the grid. So I think both sides have been omitting, realities that cannot be ignored. But, you know, many observers still don't understand the difference between, for example, environmental justice and harassment of corporations because of environmental issues. Kamala Harris is on one side. She as an attorney, as a district attorney, she was very strong against some of the oil companies to recognize that, but she was doing it on an environmental justice basis. Whether that's right or wrong is not the point. It's different than harassing oil companies just because they are fossil fuel companies. And I think this is actually a positive because going forward, what we want is not an ideological agenda that is only based on that ideology. We want some substance.
Yeah. Let me, before we go to the subsidy, that's a very interesting point. Let me ask you, LNG exports nowadays are not being, let's see, allowed to U.S. to do that. And with Trump, it may be easier to export LNG.
Yeah, I think that's a fallacy. I think that this was a case of wrong signals. And when the new LNG projects were frozen, new LNG projects, all the ones that are going and they were getting assessed and so on. And indeed, there's going to be a lot new LNG going in just because the pipeline is there. What we feared in the oil industry and in the energy industry overall is that new projects might be stopped or delayed and so on. I think we've overcome that barrier. I think it has been made clear to the progressives and, of course, to the oil lobby that LNG projects are good for the country of the U.S. and they're good for the world because we can actually, if you're really concerned about emissions and so on, we should export as much LNG as possible because that is displacing much dirtier energy.
Yeah, coal, for instance.
So overall, in the world, if you have a real concern, this would be good. So it would make no sense to go against those projects. And I think, indeed, that has been overcome. I think those projects are not threatened anymore, except maybe by political rhetoric, using that as an argument. But it's an empty argument nowadays. Yeah. I'm sure that in the Harris platform, that will be recognized because that points to a very strong development, not just for the region, the South and the Gulf states and Texas and so on, but for the U.S. as a country.
About subsidies, do Republicans apply subsidies as Democrats apply? Is it totally different?
Well, there's two things. One is subsidies, and the other is equally bad, is hindering specific technologies, products, or industries. Just as I don't think, subsidies for developing energies that are clearly uneconomical, that doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense to prohibit them. Why would anyone say, "Oh, we can't have oil, we can't have wind farms or solar farms"? That's equally ridiculous. So I think, if we cut off the extremes, we're left with a middle. The question is how big that middle is. It used to be very small, but I think we're getting to the realization that we need, alternative energies to complement the grid and so on. We certainly need fossil fuels for a long time. We also need that. And that is very helpful because I think we're slowly going in the right direction. And I think the Kamala Harris rise made that clear. I wanted to point out maybe some contrasts that I think are important because a while back, you and I spoke about the Trump assassination attempt, and we mentioned, how that might change the scenario for the oil industry in the U.S. and the world, and we can see now there are some clear contrasts. Back then, this is only a few weeks ago. When we had the attempted assassination, uh, it was clear that the country as a whole was moving much further to the right in the legislative houses because of the strength of the Trump campaign. Now, I think we've seen that is not going to go as far as we thought. Just like everything, the easiest thing is to forecast a continuation of the trend. Now, we've had that, and now, with the Harris campaign, we can see that there's a counterbalance, and it's probably not going to go over to one side so much. Um, in fact, we've seen this in France, with the backlash to the right movement in France.
Do you see a strong difference between these two parties in terms of replacement of oil? I mean, Democrats are more thinking like a dream than reality, and Republicans are more in a reality way. Is it correct?
I think ideologically that is still the case of the differences. And I think that they're both equally wrong because it is wrong to imagine that we cannot even achieve net zero. It won't be very soon, but it's not necessarily net zero. It's an energy transition that's important. I know we spoke a long time ago about net zero, and we said, well, the first thing we have to worry about is energy transition or energy diversity, and that comes first. We'll worry about net zero as a consequence. And I think people have to recognize that, and even just as the left has to recognize that that's not the objective. The objective is to have energy security, affordability,
Yeah.
resilience, and all that. And the right also has to recognize that that implies a greater variety of energies being used. An interesting contrast is that, for example, as you mentioned, the energy transition and net zero really looked far-fetched when we saw, well, Trump is really rising. Now, I think we put that a little bit more into perspective because that is not zeroed out. Just if Trump gets elected, nothing will change in 20 years. It might change in the next 4 or 6 years, but over a 20-year period, we're still going to have an energy transition. We're still going to move towards more energies in the energy mix, and that's a reality. On the other hand, for example, the very progressives recognize that you can't just keep providing subsidies for electric vehicles, which are mostly bought by millionaires and rich people anyway. So it doesn't make so much sense. You have to be more reasonable about things instead of just thinking ideologically and this is good, this is bad. And I think the realization is there. Maybe that will come about more if and when we get, for example, debates with Harris and Trump, because that's when we can bring out the real policy ideology behind each candidate. So I'm hopeful that will actually come out.
Perfect. before we go to the last point, talking about Brazil and the consequence, I would like to make a provocative question for you. Are you prepared for that? So the point is the following. It seems that Kamala Harris is supporting Maduro election in Venezuela. And what are the hidden factors that are moving this support? And Republicans are not supporting Maduro because
No,
Republicans support
no,
support.
but you see, I have a very favorite guy, Oppenheimer, who said, strong men is not what makes a strong country. It's strong institutions. Certainly in Venezuela, we don't have strong institutions. We had a strong man. The other important thing is that, autocracies, no matter what kind, right or left, are always bad. We can't argue against that. Whether it was, way back before the Maduro and the Chavez, we had strong people who were very
But
much on the right, and now we have the opposite. They're both bad and wrong. And I think the Democrats and maybe Kamala
but
Harris has misstepped on this because
but
that is not right.
do you see the same interests of Republicans and Democrats in Venezuela or
Um,
different
Maybe
approach?
for different reasons. You see, a while back, we as the United States even thought that it was important to let Venezuela produce more oil to balance things out. The realization nowadays on both sides, the right and the left, is that the United States is in a much better position because of being basically at energy independence and being able to balance out what the world needs, that it does not need to be playing out to Venezuela so much. The right was already against them, and now I think the left is beginning to realize that Kamala Harris, uh, you know, made a mistake, and I think that will be borne out. And I think the same happened, for example, in Brazil. The governing uh,
That's a good point.
organizes the election, which is a complete farce. So those are going to be regrettable moments, and
Yeah. Let me ask about Brazil, please. What are the consequences for Brazil if Harris win or if Trump wins? Are there
yeah,
strong difference for us?
yeah, I think so. I don't think any of the third world countries can expect very much from a Trump presidency. They can expect a little bit more from a Harris presidency than even from a Biden presidency because she has been on the record as promoting and defending many more initiatives of engagement with Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And certainly, Brazil and the large countries, Mexico and Argentina, will be prominent. But there is a greater expectation that that will command some attention. And if that gets borne out, I think that that translates into agreements and trade and so on. But definitely, the U.S. election, as far as the Trump side, is very focused on the U.S., more isolationist and so on. Trump has that in his nature. Um, Harris, Biden, maybe a little bit less so, but made no major changes that people were expecting. And I think
So
Kamala Harris
are the
might.
same. So the
Yeah,
same. So
yeah.
there is no difference for Brazil. So Brazil is not necessary to concern about Trump or Kamala
No,
win.
but I think it will fare a little better under Harris because there is less of a. They're both isolationists, but Harris will look more at third world. That's the maybe not so important because in practice, Africa and some of the less developed countries in Asia and so on, and South America will not make or break the U.S. economy. That's meaningless. But the fact that that she might pay more attention might make Brazil feel better. It's not in practice. It's not going to mean anything. Brazil already has the attention of the major oil companies, including the U.S. companies. It could maybe do a little better, but that is not so dependent on the U.S. election as it is dependent on the Brazilian government not to put off some of the major investors. So whether diplomacy plays out better or worse really depends more on Brazil in this case. Unfortunately, it has not been very positive because the signals could have improved a lot.
So the conclusion is for Brazil, doesn't matter if
No, I don't think it
Trump
matters.
or Kamala wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the
But
same.
that's an important thing, see, because when we talk about isolationists, we have to worry as a world, as everything except the U.S. We have to worry that if the U.S. is indeed more isolationist, and even Kamala Harris doesn't break that mold drastically, you know, all of the crisis, all of the choke points that we had in the world, all of the influence that China and even the growing influence of the BRICS and so on, that will continue. That is unstoppable, and you know that's not going to change in the United States.
You mentioned something that's important and put me on to think something related to the debt of the United States. $30 trillion growing very fast to 35. So Republicans and Democrats are different on this approach.
Maybe not too much. You see, lately, I think most economists have been humbled because no one really expected such a large economy to continue growing or even make a soft landing or any of these things. It used to be economic science. If you're a big country, you grow a little bit. If you're a small country, you grow a lot. Well, the United States just broke that mold and it keeps growing in strong labor market and inflation is under control. So it looks like everything is going more or less okay. And I don't think Trump will actually break that. You know, what will happen is that within the economy, you have sectors that will be fighting for favors and so on. But internationally, it has been clear that the United States will continue to be a leading power economically, but its influence geopolitically is going to be diminished because of some of the things we already saw. Even Biden and certainly Kamala Harris are not giving the signals that the U.S. is back as a power to defend allies. That hasn't been drastically changed. You know, Trump made that obviously clear, but those signals are very muted from Biden and Kamala Harris to say, oh, no, we're going to defend you to the last straw. No. And that's what's written in the treaties, right? So all of our allies are really concerned, and they should be, and they have to put their plan Bs into force, you know, spend more money on defense and even in terms of energy, look for more energy supply sources, which is what China and others are doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor
Right.
Cleveland Jones.
Good to be with you and to share some thoughts, and we look forward to some comments in favor or against what I said.
It's good. Against is important too. Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.